You may have seen videos of people turning their old Optiplex PCs into gaming PCs by adding graphics cards and other upgrades. And you may have seen people making mineral oil PCs. But today, I'm going to turn this Dell PC into a fish tank gaming PC. So I first started out by disassembling the old Dell Optiplex, which I paid just $60 for. The great thing is that most of these Dell Optiplexes have a PCIe X16 slot that you can plug your graphics card into. So I removed all these plastic bits and then I removed the disk drive. I then unscrewed the motherboard. I then removed this weird ass looking CPU cooler. And I took out the motherboard, which is the main part we're going to be needing. So inside this motherboard we have a Core i5-6500, 8GB of RAM and a 128GB SSD. I unscrewed the power supply and took that out, although we won't be needing it. And then I took out the power switch and kept that for later. For the next part, I'm going to be splitting this aquarium into two using a thick sheet of acrylic. So I started searching for a clamp. Yeah, that will do. And using this SSD as a right angle guide, I sanded down the edge to make it fit snugly in the aquarium. I peeled off some of the film and used aquarium silicone to seal the edges between the aquarium and the acrylic. Obviously I made a mess of it, but I'm going to cover it up anyway, so no one will be able to see it. Ideally I would have liked to have the oil and water together, like in Gigabyte's Aquarium PC, but they were definitely not using mineral oil, and the reason is, mineral oil is less dense than water, so it floats on water. But in the video, their oil stays at the bottom, and that's because they were using most likely Furmark or Novec. And after seeing the prices of these liquids, I quickly closed these windows. So now all I had to do was let the silicone dry, put in the water, and hope that there were no leaks. And of course there was a leak, so I had to go back and reseal it with silicone. In the meantime, I wiped off the old thermal paste and added a new CPU cooler that just cost me $1. Like literally $1. I then got one of the cheapest semi-decent PSUs I could find, as that old PSU wouldn't be enough to power our GPU, which is this AMD RX 580 2048 SP. It's actually a 470 or 480 with a 580 BIOS, but it performs pretty much the same. I then had to get this 24-pin to 6-pin power adapter, not to blow up my graphics cards if I plugged it in, but instead to use for Dell's proprietary motherboard connector. And now I can put the motherboard into the tank using some sign holder suction cups, add a PCI extender for the graphics card, and connect the PSU up. Then I put it all into the aquarium. Then I connected my fittings to my radiator and put the fans on. I forgot to add the power button, so I put that back on, and then I connected my pump up to 13mm tubing. Now for the fish tank part, I added substrate and then silicone together some rocks to make a tower. I then put the rocks in, driftwood, and plants, and I filled it up with water. I attached on the filter and heater to the side of the aquarium, and then I removed the PC to add the pump in with the gravel just to make it look a little better. I then added the PC back in using double-sided suction cups for the PSU. I plugged in my graphics card and connected the radiator to the pump. After this I added all the oil to fill the aquarium up to the top. Now all that's left to do is check the pump's working, otherwise the oil would get very hot with no way of cooling it. And then we changed the water because it got a bit murky, tidy up the cables, add our fish, put a lid on the aquarium using a sheet of acrylic and these glass clamps. And now the aquarium PC is finished. But how well does it perform at gaming? Let's find out. So I first launched 3D Mark and we got a graphics score of 3922 with an overall score of 3647. However, I also ran this test before I put the PC in the oil, still with an RX 580 inside. And we got a graphics score of 3755 with a total score of 3554. This means just by putting the PC in the oil, we increased the score by about 100 points without changing any settings or overclocking. I even got this achievement, Cool Under Pressure, which is to keep the GPU below 55 degrees in a DirectX 12 test. Let me know if any of you guys have this achievement in the comments. Then I spun up GTA 5 at ultra settings with MSAA x8. And we got an average of 32.5 FPS in the oil PC and 31.7 FPS without the oil. So a small increase in FPS by putting the oil in the PC. However, take a look at the temperatures. The oil PC usually hovered around the 50 degrees mark, whereas without the oil PC would reach upwards of 65 degrees. So this means we could have overclocked this PC by quite a bit and get quite a bit of performance boost, because the oil kept the GPU and CPU so cool. Next, Red Dead Redemption 2 gave us 32 FPS in the oil and 29.8 FPS normally. And again, the temperatures were much lower in the oil. Our 1% and 0.1% lows for the oil PC were 4.4 and 3.4 FPS respectively, showing that there was a fair bit of stuttering. This is most likely due to the small 8GB of RAM, which is actually the same as the video memory in the RX 580. Ideally we should have stuck in another 8GB stick and it would have performed better. In Shadow of the Tomb Raider we got an average of 41.3 FPS when inside the oil, and 40.5 outside the oil. But yet again, the temperatures were really low in the oil, and overclocking is definitely a possibility here. Forza at ultra settings gave us 50.2 FPS for the oil PC, and 45.7 FPS without the oil. So here there was quite a big jump in FPS just by adding the mirror oil. The 1% and 0.1% lows were 4.4 FPS and 1 FPS respectively. And this is definitely due to the lack of RAM, because warnings would sometimes come up about low system memory. So yeah, it would definitely need a RAM upgrade at some point, but it will be relatively easy and inexpensive as the motherboard has 4 RAM slots available. CS2 at high settings with 4x MSAA, and we got 135.3 FPS for the mineral oil test and 126.4 when we tested without the mineral oil. So again, a small jump in performance. Ideally we would have turned down the settings to low to get a competitive experience in CS2 with a maximum amount of FPS. And finally I launched Furmark for 10 minutes to do a stress test, and after 10 minutes the oil PC was at 58 degrees with a maximum of 58 degrees. But the air-cooled test was at 67 degrees with a maximum of 72 degrees. So this goes to show that the oil really does help cool the PC. So overall, this PC cost me around $550. One of the main costs was actually the mineral oil at about $140, as filling up litres and litres of oil turns out to be actually quite expensive. Thanks for watching.